This is a republic, if you can keep it, with Mark Brewer and Jeff Timmer.
I'm Jeff Timmer. Welcome to the Greenland, Iceland, whatever I want it, give it to me now episode of A Republic, if you can keep it. Taco Trump went to Davos, intent on taking over Greenland or Iceland, depending on the moment and his slipping mind. He calls our longtime allies stupid and worthless, rattles American sabers the way that Putin did 4 years ago in advance of his offensive war into neighboring Ukraine. And he comes home with what he's calling the concept of a framework for future agreement that amounts to little more than total surrender to a united Europe and tanking world and American financial markets. That, after a 1-hour rambling, disjointed speech, and that's being kind, to the assembled world leaders who watched in jaw-dropping silence.
I'm Mark Brewer. You know, Jeff, I got to give a shout out, though, to the Prime Minister of Canada. I thought Mark Carney just gave an outstanding speech, particularly in contrast to Trump. But that being said, Trump not only had a bad week, a bad several days in Davos, he's had a really bad week here at home with a series of defeats. His beauty pageant runner-up is forced to resign after a federal court reminds her that she was not, in fact, the U.S. Attorney for Northern Virginia. The Supreme Court seems poised to veto his efforts to stack the Federal Reserve with his stooges. Earlier today, in an outstanding performance, but it was substantive as well, former special counsel Jack Smith verbally filleted Trump, testifying in great detail of the case that it was Trump who instigated the January 6th insurrection in an effort to overturn the 2020 election, and that he could have and should have been indicted. Another federal court struck down the blatantly unconstitutional tactics being used by ICE in Minneapolis. And on top of that, a newly uncovered ICE memo indicates that Trump's goon squad believes it has the authority to break down doors of homes without a warrant. And that has put Homeland Barbie Kristi Noem on the defensive yet again.
And here in Michigan, legislation has been introduced pushing back on ICE tactics by designating things like no arrest zones, prohibit masking of law enforcement with common sense exceptions, and prohibiting the release of government information to ICE without a judicial warrant.
In addition, Michigan's research universities are pushing back on Trump's efforts to stifle free speech on college campuses. Later in the podcast, we'll talk with University of Michigan Regent Jordan Acker about the challenges facing one of the world's leading research institutions. But Jeff, why don't we begin with the combination, I think, of the escalating battle in Minneapolis, which I think is kind of a forerunner of what we may see this year in the elections, in combination with what we saw in Davos this week. I mean, as you pointed out, a rambling, incoherent, embarrassing. I mean, I'm ashamed, frankly, to be an American that we have inflicted this guy on the rest of the world, let alone on ourselves. But between these two locales, overseas and here in the States, it seems like Trump is just fumbling and flailing. His poll numbers consistently down repeatedly, even on issues that he was elected to be strong on, like the economy and immigration. Poll numbers in the tank again. Where are we headed, Jeff? What does all this kind of foretell for the rest of 2026?
Wow. 2025 was arguably the most volatile year across the board that we've had in the United States since the Civil War. And we've had turmoil. We've had domestic turmoil. We've had national security issues and foreign turmoil over time. But since the end of World War II and the rise of the U.S. as the leader of the free world, and I don't just mean in terms of the opposition to communism that dominated most of the post-war time, the leader who provided the economic and security stability to drive that economy and make countries safe by enforcing a world order where we did not have chaos the 19th century for colonialism all across the globe, the dividing up of territories among the great powers that led to both World War I and World War II. We seem intent, certainly Russia and Putin, and after the fall of the empire, the new order arose in the Star Wars series, and the same thing happened after the fall of the Soviet Union. Out with the old guys, in with the new guys. We're the same as the old guys. In China and Xi are an extension of that old world order, authoritarian. We will dominate the world and try to carve up as much of it as we can through force and coercion, if necessary. And now, the United States has always been imperfect when it comes to choosing our allies in some of these battles. We've sided with regimes in places, I think back to the whole Iran-Contra situation, or Southeast Asia. We've chosen the lesser of two evils in order to thwart our geopolitical opponents over the course of time. But now the U.S. under Trump has abdicated that role. It's not a temporary aberration, and that's what made Mark Carney's speech so profound. Is it signaled the end of the Pax Americana that has, yes, we've had almost continual conflict across the globe since the end of World War II, but it has been contained, and it has been fought, and oftentimes by proxy, rather than big major nations fighting in big open battlefields or firing nukes at each other, or, as technology advances. And between Carney's speech recognizing that and saying what the sane, sober, smart, aware leaders of the world are thinking as they look at Trump, they laughed at him during his first term. They did. He was a clown. He's always been a clown. They knew that. Now they just watch in horror at what he's done to that world order. And I know world order is a bad term to a lot of people on the right. I mean, just the stability, the predictability that has led to the greatest economy in the most powerful nation in world history, that being the United States. And Trump is single-handedly dismantling that. The Congress has abdicated its role completely and entirely and let him just wreck the U.S. economy and the world economy, wreck these alliances. We are fighting our allies, our long-term allies, the folks who have fought and died with us. When we were attacked in 2001, it was the Canadians and the Norwegians and the Danes who were there defending us under Article 5 of NATO. And Trump is willing and is threatening force against them when he would not threaten Vladimir Putin, ever. The abdication of the U.S. power, the U.S. ideal, or the claim to be the ideal, the shining city on the hill that Reagan spoke so eloquently of, is gone. And Trump has destroyed that. It's over the last 10, 11 years, he has taken a century of American power and ground it into dust. Yes, unquestionably, we still have the world's largest economy, and we have the world's mightiest army. But the American power has not come from what we can do with our army. It's the restraint we show with that power, using that power judiciously to defend freedom and democracy rather than a cudgel to get what we want. It is not what we want. It's what he wants. Going to war with Greenland, yeah, that's a big. We're going to war with Greenland and the Danes and the European Union. Nobody in America wants that. A lot of people in Trump's coalition don't want that. That's why his numbers are tanking so bad, why his popularity is down somewhere around that of chlamydia and gonorrhea. And especially certainly with Democrats, but but increasingly so with independents. When Trump is now approaching 70% unfavorable among independents, it's going to be a bloodbath in November if we have free and fair elections. And that's where I want to pivot into Minnesota, because what we're seeing in Minnesota is it's the petri dish for what we're going to see all year. 2025 was a test case. It's what we saw in Portland, in Los Angeles, in Washington, D.C., and in Chicago. We're seeing exponentially greater in Minnesota. The unilateral illegal withholding of appropriated funds, these wild claims about trillions of dollars taken by Somali pirates, the race baiting Mein Kampf language that's coming out of Trump and the Republicans is astounding. The summary execution of Renee Good and the complete lack of accountability or even willingness to investigate the lawless thuggery of Trump's stormtroopers. I mean, whatever ICE was, and I don't know, nobody paid it. ICE wasn't a thing that was at the forefront of Americans' minds 10 years ago. Trump has taken whatever it was and turned it into his SA or his SS, unleashing them on the U.S. Trump has fought Americans with more vigor than he's fought any foreign foe, defended Putin and Xi and Kim in North Korea more stridently than he defends the laws in the Constitution of the United States, where we're now in, I think, what I said earlier, the period of the greatest turmoil since the Civil War. The difference between now and then, the Confederates weren't holding the levers of power in the United States. The federal government led by Trump is at war with the American economy, the American people, and our allies around the world. And we need to look at this with sober eyes and recognize that none of these actions signal a person, a party who feel that they're going to lose power and they're going to do everything they can to stop it. And in a free and fair election, they can't win this November. And so they're going to do everything they can to not have a free and fair election. Jack Smith talked eloquently today about what we all saw on January 6, 2021, the dress rehearsal for what we're going to see this fall. Yes, this isn't for Trump to stay in power for another 2 years, but it's to prevent the Democrats from taking control of the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate and hold him accountable and hold his lawless administration, Kristi Noem and Greg Bovino and Tom Homan and all these folks who are running roughshod over the liberties and freedoms of Americans, running roughshod over the Constitution and running roughshod over the rule of law from being held accountable. These people will stop at nothing. We have to expect it, and we have to show up in force to prevent them, show up in big enough numbers that nothing they can do is going to stop democracy and stop the American people from claiming our country back.
You know, Jeff,
Did I
as
answer your
always,
question?
very well said. In many different ways, my friend. Very articulate, very, very thoughtful. You're right. I mean, we have just incredible chaos and conflict abroad and at home. Abroad, you know, Canada and these other countries can make their own way, right? They can, and I wish them well. I think Carney was spot on in terms of what he said in Davos, that they've got to, you know, form their own new world order, because they're dealing with attempted hegemons like the United States, Russia, and China that are going to eat them up if they don't stand up and resist. And I wish them well in that. Unfortunately for you and I and our listeners and everybody else in America, we can't walk away, right? I mean, we are here. So how are we going to deal with this chaos? And I think there are two things that we really need to do. I think these popular protests are very, very important in terms of what's going on. They got to be peaceful, because as Governor Tim Walz in Minnesota has said, that if they turn violent, that's exactly what Trump is looking for. It's exactly what he's looking for, to bring in the National Guard, to invoke the Insurrection Act. But I think the peaceful protests have had and will continue to have an effect, not only on policy, but I think in terms of giving people hope that there are others like them out there who are not in agreement with these terrible things that are going on. And there are other people in this country who feel the same way they do. But the second thing, I agree with you again, is the elections. We have got to do everything we can to protect the integrity of the elections this fall and make sure we get out and participate, that we have good candidates and that people get out and vote because, again, as you indicated, I think Jack Smith laid out the case very well today. What Trump will do if he's able to get away with it is try to overturn the election results. He tried to do that on January 6th. He didn't have the tools to do it that he had back then, but now he does have the tools. He's turned ICE into a private army, essentially. I'd like to find out who all these people are who are joining ICE. I have my suspicions about their prior allegiances. But anyway, he's turned into a private army that now believes it can invade people's homes, shoot people at will, with no accountability, with the president and others saying you have complete immunity to do whatever you think is necessary at my command. And I think that is just a precursor to what we could see in the fall unless people rise up and say, we're not going to put up with that. We're going to protect our elections and we're going to push back and elect a Congress and elect leaders at the state and local level who are going to stand up for our traditional values, our traditional beliefs, and fight for the American people. Not a president who has accumulated nearly $2 billion in private wealth alone in the year he's been in office, plus all the billions accumulated by his family. They're basically looting the country using the presidency to do that. All about him, all about what he can gain, and the rest of us be damned. I think we're going to have one last good chance to say no to this guy, and it's coming in November.
The presenting sponsor of A Republic If You Can Keep It is Epic MRA, measuring the pulse of Michigan for more than 4 decades.
When most of us think about polling, the focus is on those campaign polls telling us which candidates are winning. But the most important polls are for businesses, local governments, and nonprofits assessing the needs and wants of their customers or constituencies.
Those are polls that guide policies and lead to institutional success. Those polls have to get it right, which makes the choice of a public opinion research firm critical. Epic MRA has been trusted for more than 4 decades to get it right. Our clients have included school boards, statewide nonprofits, corporations, as well as the candidates and news media who rely on us during political campaigns. Whether it's just a couple of questions or a full in-depth survey, we are here and ready to help.
You can reach us at epicmra.com.
Joining the conversation is University of Michigan Regent Jordan Acker. Jordan is my friend and partner at the Goodman Acker law firm. Prior to law school, Jordan worked as a communications aide to the U.S. House Judiciary Committee. After law school, he served as an associate in the White House Office of Presidential Personnel before being appointed by President Obama to be an attorney advisor to Secretary Janet Napolitano at the Department of Homeland Security. While at DHS, Jordan worked on cyber, immigration, and other homeland security issues. After returning to Michigan, he was elected to the U of M Board of Regents in 2018.
Acker was named one of Crain's Detroit 40 under 40 back in 2020, and Michigan Lawyers Weekly listed him among their up-and-coming lawyers. He is an alum of the nonpartisan Michigan Political Leadership program at Michigan State University. Since joining the University of Michigan Board of Regents, he has focused on reforming sexual misconduct reporting and adjudication at the university. He's focused on NCAA reform, including the future of NIL, expanding the Go Blue guarantee, and making the University of Michigan affordable for all Michiganders.
Welcome, University of Michigan Regent Jordan Acker, up for re-election this year. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But right now, Jordan, I want to hear about this new president at the University of Michigan. He's got ties to the university. Sounds like a very exciting hire for the university. Tell us about him.
Yeah. So first of all, great to be here, guys. The new president of the university, a man named Kent Syverud. He was a law professor at Michigan. He has 2 degrees from the university, met his spouse at the University of Michigan. He was the dean of Washington University in St. Louis, the law school, and at Vanderbilt before becoming the chancellor at Syracuse, where he's been for about the past decade, and really was looking towards his retirement. He's towards the end of his career, and decided, amazingly enough, he said, I was going to stay and do a real job for one place and one place only, as the University of Michigan. So he's a longtime Michigan guy. He's actually on the board of the Alumni Association before he was hired as president. And the thing that I like the most about him, and there's lots of things to like, but the thing is that he's one of us. He built a cabin north of Harbor Springs when he was a law professor at Michigan, and they've been coming back to that same place up on Lake Michigan every year. He's one of us, and really excited to have him start in the summer.
What are some of his initiatives based on what you interviewed him? Obviously, you all hired him. What are some of the things that he wants to focus on as your new president?
Well, the first thing is when he started at Syracuse, he had to clean up a mess. It was a fiscal mess. They were way in debt. Just to give you an example of what they were dealing with here, the Carrier Dome, which everyone knows is the home of Syracuse athletics, was actually the smallest naming rights deal in Division I sports. And it was in perpetuity, had existed since the late 1970s. So just those kinds of things were where he started. What he's emphasized is fiscal responsibility. What he's emphasized is quiet transformation. He's not a loud guy. You're not going to see splashy things. But what he did was he attracted new businesses to Syracuse, New York. He attracted some business to expand there and partner with the university. That's for Syracuse. What he's going to do at Michigan is going to be he's going to push Michigan to be the best university in the world. He knows that Michigan is the single largest recipient of federal dollars, and protecting that is going to be a big part of what he does. But he does things strategically. It's not his nature to just go all out and attack or all out in defense. He's a lawyer, and he's the kind of person who would actually has clerks for the Supreme Court. He understands the art of negotiation, and it's something that he will definitely bring to the president's office. One thing that I find very interesting about him is a lot of law professors like to do high and mighty things when they're doing their legal research. He decided to literally write the book on insurance law, which is not the sexiest law in America, but it's actually one of the most important. It affects more Americans than any high and mighty legal writing that you would do. Almost everyone has insurance or is infected by insurance rates at some point, and that's what he decided to do. So he's a humble change agent, and that's what I expect him to be as the next president of the University of Michigan.
Given all the turmoil that we've seen, I don't want to single out University of Michigan. Michigan State University has had turmoil in leadership, some implosions at the top of both universities, problems with the sports, scandals like Nassar and Jerry Anderson. And now the universities, our prominent research universities here in Michigan and across the country have become centers of political storms in the last year since the new second Trump administration. How does it make it difficult to govern, provide that steadiness that you're describing with this new president under all of this turmoil that's out there, and the way it has flavored the way the legislature and power brokers in Lansing look at the universities with funding, and the way Washington looks at universities with funding? I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, I know, but that's what you have to navigate through in your next term, and with this new president and new coaches and all of that. So,
yeah, it's a really big challenge. Michigan is lucky in a lot of respects, because even despite the view of higher education as going down, we see this across all demographic groups. It's obviously more among Republicans and among Democrats, but the University of Michigan has kept a relatively high esteem among the state of Michigan. And the obvious reason why is that everybody in the state knows someone who's gone to a Michigan medicine facility, right? That helps you a lot. So it's obvious at least for a lot of Michiganders, what Michigan's part of our public mission is. But it's hard. It's a tremendous challenge. You have groups on the far right who are dedicated to destroying higher education as much as they can. But you also have the far left, and some of it includes some of the professors and other groups on campus that are willing to feed into what the far right does to make where 90% of students and faculty and staff are that much more difficult. We're lucky in that we've had good relationships across the political spectrum with Lansing and Washington. Just to single out a few names, Hillary Scholten, Debbie Dingell as Democrats have been really, really helpful for the university. Lisa McClain and Tim Walberg have done the same, actually, because they understand that the value of the University of Michigan to this state. There's been a great bipartisan consensus to help us move forward. But we recognize that at Michigan, when you make mistakes, they're really, really public. How do you go from being the football coach in the morning to jail in the afternoon? How do you go to the Dr. Anderson situation? How do you deal with President Mark Schlissel being terminated for having an alleged interaction with a subordinate? Right? These are all things that happen very much in the public eye. That was a big part of the reason, to be honest, why we picked Kent Syverud to be our next leader. That the Regents favored, and I think correctly, favored stability over a generation-long presidency. The university needs someone who is savvy. The university needs leaders who understand the complex navigation of Lansing and of Washington. And one of the things that I really appreciated about Professor Syverud, us lawyers don't get the doctor title, is that navigating Albany can be hard. And also navigating Washington can be hard. And navigating New York City politics can be hard. And he had to do all of those things at Syracuse in a place that's not as favored by the state legislature as other places. And I think compared to what he's going to deal with in Ann Arbor, I think he's actually really well positioned to deal with both Republicans and Democrats, both in Washington and Lansing, on what the University of Michigan does. Doesn't mean we're not without challenges, though. We've had over $100 million of federal grants rescinded in the last year alone. There will be a real cost to this, too, not just in research hours and obviously cures for cancer and the things that we work on campus, but jobs here in Southeast Michigan. We now operate a large medical system across the state in places like Shiawassee County, Sparrow and Lansing, all the way into West Michigan. These are things that have real impacts when you have research funding issues. And the other one, and I think this goes to a lot of it, is we all know that reimbursement rates on health insurance in Michigan are also really low. And that impacts our ability to provide care in places like Shiawassee County that really need a local hospital. That becomes a lot harder when Blue Cross is, I think, 47th in the country in reimbursement rates. So these are the kinds of issues that the new president will be navigating, and having an experienced captain at the helm of that ship, I think, is really important.
Jordan, I've been really pleased to see the university reinvest in our communities in Michigan. You are building a new facility at the old Kresge headquarters out there in Troy. You're building a major facility in downtown Detroit. Tell us a little bit about the university's philosophy of investing in Michigan communities.
Well, for us, especially on the medical side, the brand is so strong, right? We see this over and over again across the state. If you have a real medical issue that requires specialty care, over and over and over again, patients choose Michigan wherever they can. And for us, that allows us to expand that brand throughout the state. But it's not enough, right? And from a board perspective, we've started to think about what can we do to get our specialists, what can we do to get our teachers, what can we do to get our doctors, our dentists out into the state. One of the things that we've rolled out, in addition to expanding the Go Blue guarantee, which allows any student in the state of Michigan who gets into our Ann Arbor campus to go tuition free if their household income is under $125,000. In addition to that, we've started to institute what we're calling a graduate guarantee. So if you have a degree in social work or teaching or nursing or medicine, what we want to get to a place is where that you can go work in Michigan somewhere for 5 years after graduation and have your debt relieved. That's what we're talking about. And the philosophy is ultimately, we know as a great public university, we have a global mission. We know that, but we also have a state mission. And our state mission means sometimes we have to serve residents first. That means, like you talked about, with these great facilities like we're building in Oakland County, but it also means that keeping Michigan as the single best deal for in-state students of any university in the country. And that's a big part of something I'm proud of.
You've taken a real personal interest, Jordan, I know, in the state of college athletics, the name, image, and likeness deals that are out there. Give us a little bit of your thoughts, your philosophy on how we should be dealing with college athletes, getting paid, et cetera, these days.
It's a really great question. And one of the things that I found so interesting over the last so in 2019, I spoke from the board table and said that NIL rights not being allowed to student athletes was not okay, was actually illegal. People kind of were like, "Oh, I don't know if you like that one," but I was actually didn't go far enough to where things were headed. I think at this point it's obvious student athletes are employees. I don't think it's a close call. And I think we have to get to a point where we can say, how are we going to collectively bargain with these student athletes? It's going to happen in one form or another, because what we've seen is that universities have taken the position that we have to avoid collective bargaining over literally everything else. People love to talk about NIL as a big problem for college athletics. It's not. The biggest problem with college athletics is the transfer portal. The ability to leave a school every single year and go somewhere else where you can get paid more is detrimental to the student athlete. It's detrimental to the school, to the coaching staff, to the sport, to the academic progress of all involved. And so you have to resolve that first. Now, does that mean you get one transfer in a 4-year period? That might be part of what occurs here. I personally believe that there is a lot of value if you're a freshman, you don't get playing time, to sit on the bench and learn from a junior for a year. I think it grows you as a person, as an athlete, but you can't do that without collective bargaining. And I think that at some point, the big four are going to have to realize two things. First of all, that collective bargaining is going to happen. And second of all, that the requirements for college athletes, specifically football, men's basketball, and to a lesser extent, women's basketball, are different than every other sport. Our football teams, our men's and women's basketball teams, they fly on chartered planes around the country. It's not a big deal to fly to Eugene, Oregon when you're flying on a 757 in first class. Not the most comfortable thing, but it's a time zone change. For our student athletes who are doing volleyball or golf or swimming, they're flying commercial. That is an incredible strain on a student athlete's body. And I think about this in the context of one of Mark's alma maters, Stanford University, which is now, for some reason that I can't understand, in the Athletic Coast Conference. And instead of doing most of their studying in Palo Alto, California, these students are flying across the country every week to play schools, not UCLA or Berkeley or Oregon or Washington like they have traditionally. They're now traveling across the country. There was a point actually where the women's field hockey team at Stanford was playing, their closest league game was in Hanover, New Hampshire. Now,
close, right
that
around the
doesn't make
corner.
any sense. I mean, it's basically like a hop, skip, and a jump from Palo Alto. But the point is that these things need to be re-regionalized, right? If it makes sense, and I guess there is an argument that Michigan should play Washington and Oregon in football. Okay, I can make that argument. I can't make the argument that we need to do that in cross country. I just can't. So if that means that Stanford gets to play Berkeley and UCLA and Washington, I think that makes a lot more sense than what we're doing right now. And I got to tell you guys, the university presidents and the conference commissioners have a lot of blame for why we're here. They've chased the dollar down so many rabbit holes and then want to blame student athletes for us getting here. No, no, no. It is the presidents that have caused this. It is the former commissioner of the Big Ten Conference that destroyed the Pac-12 overnight without even consulting with the Council of Chancellors. That's what happened here. And there is just simply no oversight. We got to do better. And if it means that I have to speak out, I'm okay with that. That's part of my job as a public representative, is to understand this system is bad for America. It's bad for college sports. And by the way, getting away from just college sports in general, Stanford will tell you, I'm just picking on Mark's alma mater just because, he loves it. He loves what I'm about to say. How many Olympic athletes come from NCAA sports? So many. At Stanford, they have so many that Katie Ledecky only gets to put 2 of her medals out in the facility. They got to store the rest in storage. But think about that for a second. When you're watching the Winter Olympics or the Summer Olympics, how many of the USA athletes are playing or have played NCAA sports? That is a big part of this. And we have to protect those as much as we protect everything else.
Well, Jordan, it sounds like you've got a big agenda for your next term on the Board of Regents. You're up for re-election, and I indicated earlier we're going to give you a chance to talk about what's going on with your re-election, how people can get in touch with your campaign. So tell us about, because a lot of our listeners probably don't know, how do you get elected to these boards? How do you get nominated? Tell us a little bit about your campaign and why.
Why does Michigan do it this way? And it's not, I don't mean University of Michigan. Michigan as a state elects these people. So,
right. I would love to hear from Mark. You were at the 1963 Constitutional Convention, right?
I think Walt was.
I think it's an interesting system. So basically, we've set this up, as far as I can tell, as a compromise to our 3 largest research universities, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State, have directly publicly elected boards. And the rest of our public universities have their boards appointed by the governor. Why they decide to do this, I have no idea. But for Michigan, it's worked out really well. The way that this nomination process works is how do you even get on the ballot? Because again, it's elected in November of election years, 2 every 2 years. So there's 8 of us, and you serve an 8-year term. The parties actually nominate 2 people for these boards at their state party conventions. Michigan in the past has been very lucky, in a bipartisan way, of electing people who are serious about the institution, who have serious records in dealing with the institution, Republicans and Democrats, and haven't been these sort of tear the place down types that you've seen maybe try to get on elsewhere. But it also gives the delegates at party conventions an enormous amount of power over our education boards in this state. It allows the people to have a real influence. And so our convention, that is going to be a nominating convention, our endorsement convention, is going to be on April 19th in Detroit to renominate folks for Attorney General, Secretary of State, to nominate candidates for the Supreme Court, and for the State Board of Education, Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State's boards, of which I'll be standing as a candidate and hoping that the delegates will vote for me for a second 8-year term for lots of different reasons. I mean, things that we've talked about, obviously, but because people who are listening to this podcast know majorities are thinner than you realize. Democrats currently have a 6-2 majority on this board, and it's allowed us to do things that are taken a little bit for granted. Things like being pro-labor. We have a neutrality policy that actually goes further than the right to work that was repealed by our Democratic legislature last year. We have higher wages than the state minimum. We're also the largest employer in the state, and it has an impact on everything that we do. But nominating unelectable candidates, which has happened at times at these, leads to lost seats. And it's something that I think Democrats shouldn't take for granted come 2026, when we're going to have contested elections, both for governor and for Senate on the same ballot come November.
Yeah. You mentioned the 6-2 board, and the Republicans, the 2 Republicans, I've known both of them a long time, and given the current status of the Republican primary or the convention delegates, Carl and Sarah both had to convince people that they didn't eat with forks in order to get nominated, but they're capable people. Now with the convention, the one that you're facing, or that Republicans are facing, the pressures of the day, of the politics that govern the passions of convention delegates in both parties, certainly impacts the stability, the pragmatic governance of the university. The skills and temperament required to do the job that you're being elected to aren't necessarily of interest at all to the delegates in either party. And so how do you navigate that? You're a studious, pragmatic, conscientious person looking to do this, and all of a sudden one faction of your party, and I'm just kind of saying the collective you guys. How do you navigate that? Satisfy the whims of the convention delegates. I think back a couple years ago when Andy Fisher Newman tried to get renominated. She had been a longtime regent, went out in the Republican battle for nomination, tried to sound like a MAGA Republican, which she wasn't, and got trounced. And so, how does that then carry over to the collegiality or working together as a board when you have to be, I guess, somewhat tuned into those passions of the mob that dominate conventions?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that I think one of the things that people understand, and by the way, most of our delegates do eat with forks, Jeff. I don't know what goes on over at Republican Party headquarters these days. I assume it's probably a spork or maybe to just eat with their hands.
Yeah.
But most of our delegates the Democratic Party, our activists are really pragmatic and really thoughtful in a way that I think, yes, is there a level of disliking Trump? Of course there is. But I think there's also a level of that our delegates recognize the first thing foremost is you have to win. Mm-hmm. And I think that our delegates are still, there's still a lot of labor delegates involved. I'm working really hard to hopefully win those endorsements. But even outside of labor, people are pretty pragmatic. Look, is there always going to be a portion of any convention body that says, well, we want our way on a single issue, right? I mean, I'm facing a challenge basically off of one single issue that this group disagrees with me on. Of course, that's going to happen. But the reality is that over the course of a day, you have to deal with lots and lots of issues at the university. Most of them, by the way, do not have to do with Gaza or have to do with foreign policy. They mostly have to do with how do we keep Michigan affordable for Michiganders, and how do we keep and make sure that some of the pro-worker policies that we've implemented stay that way, right? And then there's a third branch of it, and I think this is the part that our delegates are most aware of, is that the rights that you have as a patient at a Michigan medicine facility can be taken away by this federal government in long part, but also by a board that is pliant to and interested in doing the whims of the Trump administration. I have tremendous respect for Sarah Hubbard. We work together on a lot of different issues, but we disagree strongly on trans healthcare. Right? And I know that a board dominated by MAGA Republicans will make trans healthcare impossible. But it won't stop there. It'll be abortion rights. In the 90s, people forget this now. Dave Brandon, before he was destroying the athletic department, was taking away stem cell research from the state as a launching pad to his own political career. These are the kinds of issues that are actually really important on a day-to-day basis, and why having Democrats who are doing the right thing and can win is so important. And that's ultimately what I expect. Even those who disagree with me on one or two issues are going to say at this convention is that Jordan has a track record of winning statewide elections, and he's a good Democrat. And, he stands with labor over and over and over again. And those are ultimately, that's the best you can do. I like to think that winning elections still matters a bit in this state.
Well, with that, Jordan, I know you're a big family man. Your family's very important to you, and we need to let you go so you can spend some time with your family. Good luck to you at the endorsement convention. But before you go, tell us how people can connect with your campaign.
But I was going to get to come in here and tell the story about how Mark Brewer is the only person who got me arrested when I was 23 years old.
We got to hear that.
When I was 23 years old, I worked for Mark at the state party, and it was my job to go around and videotape Dick DeVos giving speeches at high school auditoriums. I was part of the tracking team. It was a great job right out of college. And I had the principal of one of the Lapeer high schools, I can't remember which one, actually try to put those ties on my arm. And then Mark gave this high school principal a 2-minute diatribe about the First Amendment, and I was free to go. So that's as close as I've ever been to an arrest, was Mark Brewer and the First Amendment got me out of it. But all jokes, it's one of my favorites. But all kidding aside, you can check me out, ackerformichigan.com. I'm on social media, Jordan Acker MI, on all your favorite places. And I look forward to seeing people at convention and, of course, around the state this fall, and maybe next Rose Bowl. Can we do that too? Can we talk about football in a good way? How about the 2027 Rose Bowl?
I like it. Well, as a diehard green and white Spartan, I was happy to see my twins go to the University of Michigan, and part of the reason was I knew it was in good hands with people like you. And the job you've done and your colleagues have done there, trying to navigate through this shitstorm that's gone on around you, with the university administration, with the sports, and with politics in Lansing. And we're still going to see Jerry Anderson impact the governor's race, because that's where Mike Cox's money is coming from in his campaign. So it's still playing and rearing its head in Michigan politics. Jordan, thanks for joining us. Good luck to you at the endorsement convention in April, at the nominating convention later in the summer, and in the re-election next fall.
Thank you, guys. Go Blue.
Thanks, Jordan. That's a wrap for this week. Great thanks to my friend and colleague Jordan Acker for adding his brilliance to the conversation.
A reminder to head over to our website to connect with our YouTube channel. Our website is arepublicpodcast.com.
And if the Republic is still standing and ICE hasn't snatched Jeff and I from our homes and shipped us off to Somalia, we will return next week.
As always, thank you for your attention to this matter.
A Republic, if you can keep it, is a copyrighted presentation of Michigan citizens for a better tomorrow.